After sketching out our plan, the next question that needed answering was, do we have enough yarn? We were fortunate enough to work with Pendleton Woolen Mills to secure 3 boxes worth of cones to support the project. But would it be enough? It was time to do some counting and measuring. Since we aren't getting too fancy, just trying to replicate what we already are working with, we went straight to the source, our loom. The first thing we needed to determine was how many ends or single warp threads per inch our project requires. You could use a measuring tape, but I prefer this handy-dandy pick counter. This is a really simple tool that just has 2 little pointers set about 1 inch apart from each other. Just put it down on the woven fabric and start counting the warp threads between the 2 pointers. This is a little difficult on our current woven fabric because we are missing so many warp threads that have broken over many years of operation and little maintenance. Taking into account the missing threads, we came up with 20 ends per inch. If we multiply that number by the total width of the fabric in inches, we get a total number of warp threads needed for the project, or 1,440. This number was a bit of a relief because it matched one archival dressing card we have on display. Good to know we weren't too far off the mark, and that this was a more standard setup for some of the goods being made at the Thomas K. Woolen Mill. 1,440 is the number of individual warp threads needed, but every one of these pieces of yarn needs to be a certain length. We somewhat arbitrarily chose a nice round number of 50 yards. Multiply 50 yards by the number of warp ends, and we get a total of 72,000 yards of yarn needed for our warp. But warp is only half of our woven fabric. Since we had the pick counter out, we also measured our picks, or individual weft or fill threads per inch, and got 18. Because we measured our fabric and know that it is 6 feet wide, that means that every inch of length of fabric will have 18 6-foot passes of weft yarn in it, or, doing the math, 108 feet or 36 yards of weft yarn. Knowing that we will likely lose about 10 yards of warp on the loom fixing process, we can estimate that the length of our entire cut of actually woven cloth fabric will be about 40 yards. More math helps us determine how many inches of woven fabric there are in 40 yards of cloth, 1,440 inches, and multiply that by the 36 yards per inch of weft yarn needed, and we get a grand total of 51,840 yards needed for our weft. So, the total yarn we need for this project, warp and weft, comes to 123,840 yards of yarn. Whew. Okay, that's how much yarn we need, but how much yarn do we have? It is impractical to unwind the yarn from the cone to measure it, so we rely on weight and math to help us. Luckily, we work with some wonderful weavers who have to deal with this problem a lot, albeit on a slightly smaller scale. It was off to the Textile Learning Center on the 4th floor of the museum, home to the Salem Fiber Arts Guild, in search of just the right tool and someone to talk us through our math to make sure we weren't completely going astray. The weavers at SFG helped us do a little bit of double checking on our calculations and introduce us to the amazing McMorran balance, developed by a lecturer at a Scottish textile university. This measuring tool is calibrated to help determine yards per pound for the yarn we are using. Setting up the balance, a sample piece of yarn is placed over the hook and trimmed with scissors until the hook balances horizontally. We then measure the piece of balanced yarn. It came to 27.5 inches. And through the formula provided with the balance, times the length of measured by 100 to determine the yards per pound. In our case, we got 2,750 yards per pound. We then got out our trusty postage scale. We're a history museum after all, and it was the most precision instrument I could find. And our representative cones for some weighing. We have 2 different sizes of cones, bigger and smaller, so we weighed a sample of each and subtracted the weight of the cone core for a good measure. We then multiplied the weight of each size cone by its respective number of cones in the boxes, with 78 small cones weighing 2.4375 pounds and 65 bigger cones weighing 4.5 pounds for a grand total of 482.625 pounds of yarn. In order to get an estimate of the total yards we have on those cones, we just have to multiply the pounds of yarn by the 275 yards per pound number for a grand total of 1,327,218.75 yards of yarn, which is thankfully much greater than the amount needed. This should give our trial run lots of room for mistakes. To end out our foray in practical mathematics, we set out to answer one more question. How long would 50 yards of warp last us in demonstrating? We started out with some basic assumptions. Each demonstration of the loom produces about a ½ inch of woven fabric. We know that 50 yards of warp should give us about 40 yards of woven fabric. If we do one demonstration a day, how many years will it be before we need to rewarp the loom? You can pause the video now and figure it out yourself if you'd like.
Here's how we did it. 40 yards should produce about 2,880 demonstrations.
With 365 days a year, that should give us almost 8 years of daily demonstrations. Enough time, at least, to perfect our process. Now we have the yarn squared away. It was time to make sure we had all the other supplies we might need. That meant doing a little digging through the collections for parts. Join us next time for a behind-the-scenes scavenger hunt.
So I got 2 different lengths there.
Okay, I'll measure them.
I'm not sure. Are there 3 different lengths?